Hello everybody. So welcome to episode 31 of Teh Tarik with Walid, season 4. And I am glad to be back after I believe 3 months or 2.5 months hiatus. And what has happened in the past 3 months? Pretty uneventful time in Singapore politics. But I'm sure we'll get to whatever has happened in the past 3 months over the season of Teh Tarik with Walid. But today we will be having a former nominated member of parliament, Associate Professor Walter Theseira. So I am pretty happy to have him on. Hi everyone, hi everyone. So I am happy. He is a former nominated member of parliament, as I said, and I would say he's one of the more consequential ones, and I would put him right up there, together with Anthea, Quick Xiaoyin, and others. I mean, Joshua as well. I mean my friend, and I mean, coincidentally, of course, I like all those NMPs who have come on Teh Tarik Walid before. But anyway, so Professor Theseira, can you send me an invite or? Okay, it's okay. I'll send you. So we can start. Meanwhile, if you guys have any questions or comments, please type them in. Type them, and we can. Oh, hello. Hi. That was fast.
Hey, hi.
Hello. How
Yeah,
are
this is
you?
the first time I'm doing this, so I think it
Yeah,
looks like
thank you.
but
Thank you. You created an Instagram account just for this session, so I am.
uh-huh. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. I am really thankful for that. But anyway, it's about time. Facebook is for boomers, so.
Yeah, I'm a boomer lah. Why not?
Okay. So this is where all the young people are. Thank you so much, Prof Theseira. I'm really happy to have you. How are you?
Huh?
What have you been up to actually?
Huh? What
Since
if,
you since you are no longer in the public eye, what can you update everyone what you've been doing?
huh? I don't think I'm doing matters a lot since I don't do anything public lah these days. I mean, I've just been teaching university, trying to get some research done, that kind of thing lah, basically.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
most
basically normal.
right? I mean, except for
Right.
people like yourself, for example, you try to do public things, but most of us are boring lah. Yeah.
Right. So most of the daily work of an academic is pretty boring and
Mm.
straightforward, right? Yeah. So, Professor Theseira, yeah, I mean, it's fun for us. It's
I mean,
it's
yeah,
fun
I'm
for
for other people. And for
yeah, it's boring
straightforward,
to other.
that one is a matter of interpretation lah. Yeah.
Okay, so Professor Theseira, of course, is at the economics department in SUSS, the Singapore
Yeah.
University of Social Sciences. Yeah. Okay, so let's start with, I would say, I mean, it's rare to have NMPs who come up with big ideas, right? When actually, I think NMPs, in a way, they are best positioned to really push for the big ideas and the philosophies, right? I mean, I'm not saying you are the first, but I think there were only a few people who I think NMPs have really pushed for big ideas. And one of your big ideas, I think, was UBI, which is a huge one, right, in the context of Singapore, Universal Basic Income. This is similar to what Andrew Yang has proposed in the States. I mean, he's not the first. Even I think Martin Luther King Jr. did as well. He talked about something similar. So can you explain what it is first before we get to the other stuff? What is your idea of UBI in Singapore?
Yeah. Okay. So what a lot of people think of when you hear the word UBI, it means Universal Basic Income. And so what they think UBI is all about is basically giving people money so that people don't need to do anything. I mean, that's the impression a lot of people have. And of course, people have got understandable concerns that if society were to do that for everybody, then people would stop working. And then the question would become then, how is society going to create the resources to actually keep things going, right? But I want to unpack this a bit and maybe explain a bit about how economists and other social scientists have been looking at UBI and what purpose they've really been serving, not just as a thought experiment, but also in the countries and places which have actually already started to implement versions of UBI. Okay, so broadly speaking, what's the purpose of a UBI scheme or a policy like UBI. And what I want to do here is I want to separate what you might call the value judgment, which is, okay, why do I help the less advantaged? Why do I want to improve the security that people have for, like healthcare, livelihoods, food, that kind of thing, right? So let's assume for the moment that as a society, you already decided that it would be a good thing to prevent people from starving to death and making sure they've got a safety net and things like that. Okay, let's suppose you already decided that.
Seems like a fair assumption, right?
Yeah,
Like...
okay. So then I think you have a practical question. The practical question is, if you want to protect the more vulnerable members of society, what is the best way of doing it? And I think the reason why UBI schemes have a lot of interest among policymakers and academics is, conditional on you wanting to help people, UBI might be a good way to improve on the existing way that we address problems like poverty, insecurity, vulnerability, and so on. And the reason is, most of the ways that we tackle these problems today have a lot of gaps. People fall through a lot of gaps. What do I mean by that? If you think about the typical policies we have, not just in Singapore, but globally, policies are often contingent. That means that the policy waits for a bad thing to happen to you, okay? So you got to have something bad happen, like you lose your job, or somebody gets really sick or whatever it is. Okay, fine. Then the policy will help you. But not only is it contingent, the policies are means tested usually, right? Meaning we want people to apply for it. They got to fill in an application or something, and they got to prove that they cannot help themselves. That's a typical feature in many of these policies worldwide. And finally, the policies, especially in Singapore, tend to be very fragmented, meaning that when we see one problem, like the problem is, okay, people don't have enough money to go and buy groceries. Then we fix it. We say, okay, I'm going to give you grocery vouchers. If the problem is they don't have enough money to, let's say, go to the dentist, then we say, okay, look, I give you dental vouchers. But you get the point, right? I mean, every time we see a problem, we say, okay, I'm going to fix this by giving you something for this specific problem. It's a scheme for every matter. What the UBI schemes try to do as a matter of policy is to cut through this kind of mess by replacing as many schemes as possible with the basic idea that the real problem people have is they don't have the resource, the economic resources. You don't have the money, right? And if you can fix the money issue, actually a lot of other things don't become a serious problem, right? If you have the money, you don't have to worry how to eat, how to go to the dentist, basic kinds of needs like this. You don't have to worry so much about that. So that's the idea behind why UBI schemes are proposed. It's because they are thought to be possibly a more efficient way of dealing with social inequities and ills. And if they're more efficient, not only will they save, I think, the government money in terms of administration, taxpayers obviously, but they might result in more tangible benefits or outcomes for people. Like if you're spending 1 hour less a day figuring out how to apply for an aid scheme, maybe there's 1 hour you can spend on your kids or trying to find a job and things like that. So that's part of the idea behind that. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So it would basically work something like this, right? Everybody gets $1,000 a month or something, right?
Oh, yeah. So wasn't for such a large amount.
Yeah.
So the idea I had was, I think, something like about $110 per person per week, I think. And the reason for that, it was based on, I think, looking at the household expenditure survey data. And we were trying to calibrate it. So this was worked on by myself and Dr. Ong Chien, who was at the Social Service, is at the Social Service Research Center at NUS. And the amount comes from studying the expenditure data in Singapore, and is calibrated at the amount that I think lower to middle kind of a family would be spending on cash necessities. So things like groceries, going to a hawker center, your internet, so things like that.
Right. So your proposal, so it's 440 a month, right? So
per
roughly,
person.
Per person. So it was your proposal, if I remember correctly, it was temporary, right? It's not meant to be permanent.
Yeah.
So why, if your idea is so good, why should it only be temporary? Why should it not be permanent? Because outside of COVID, people do have financial problems. There's inequality and all of that. Yeah.
Well, I think when we came up with the idea, so first, I think in the context of it was that I think in general, universal basic income schemes are still considered fairly radical. But I thought the situation we were facing at the onset of the COVID crisis was that we really didn't know how bad it was going to be at that point in time. I mean, today, of course, maybe it's a bit hard to remember how things were like, I think, close to 2 years before, right?
Yeah.
So in the early days of the crisis, remember, most of us didn't know what was going to happen. Many of us thought that if you were to contract COVID, it was a death sentence. I mean, that's how many people thought about it 2 years ago. And people were losing their jobs, the travel was shutting down. So there's a lot of uncertainty, right? And even though we had a lot of people who might still have their jobs on paper, we knew that the employers were cutting their allowances, were reducing their hours. The bosses were telling them, look, if I pay you this month, company goes out of business. I don't pay you this month, maybe I can pay you next month. So these kinds of things were happening to people, right? And so we thought that rather than have people apply for aid schemes and help and so on, if you could guarantee that people would have some money in their pockets, then that could go a long way towards relieving this kind of stress and uncertainty people had. But so there are a couple of features of it, though, which relate to the question about why is it temporary.
Right.
First, that such a scheme actually is not cheap, right? I mean, if you don't want to spend from the reserves, one way you can make the scheme more financially sustainable if you can actually raise taxes to cover it, to pay for it. And I remember we calculated you would need a couple of percentage points increase in income taxes to pay for it. The other feature that we had, I think, was that we would also make it, a universal scheme, so it pays out automatically, but it's counted as income tax. I mean, it's counted as taxable income, which meant that for people who would be, not need the money, people, whose jobs are doing fine and so on, what would end up happening is they would be net payers with the program. They might get the money up front, but the next year when they file their income tax, because of the tax increase and other factors, they'd be, basically paying back all of the money they got and more as well. And that's why we made it temporary, because even just doing it for a few months, I think as we had originally planned, it would require, I can't remember the numbers offhand, but it would require a noticeable increase in income taxes for many people. And so, I mean, there's no sense, I think, in saying that you want to do this permanently when people are more likely to feel that it's something they could consider for COVID-19, but not necessarily something that they're going to come on board from permanently, right? But of course, broader scheme of things is if you get it in temporarily, and if it has a meaningful impact, meaning that the recipients, the rest of society feel that this is actually a better way of dealing with some of our social challenges than the current system, then there might be, room to consider whether you want to make that a more permanent feature. Then, of course, you can talk about calibration and so on better, but that's the thing, right? I mean, there's no need to propose that you do it permanently. And in fact, the way a lot of policymakers, academics have approached universal basic income in other countries is to put in demonstration schemes and to see how and whether it works. And if it does, then you can argue about whether you want to make it more permanent. Yeah.
Right. So the idea to make it temporary is more about to get people's buy-in rather than any economic disadvantages to it, you think?
Yeah, I think it's politically speaking, it's much more to but not just politically speaking. It's also because it's a matter of I think economic or social policy. I think we should be aware that it's quite difficult to predict with any degree of certainty what the effects of any policy are going to be, right?
In the real world,
You put it in, you don't know for sure it's going to happen. It's better to have some humility and see what happens first.
Right, okay. The taxable income thing, I think is a really good point that is often lost in the debates, right? And there's a question here by Angie. Said that she asked, do you think that unconditional UBI can be implemented? And one of the main criticisms against Andrew Yang is that, why are we giving the rich money, right? And his explanation, I don't know what you feel about it, is that the moment you start saying that only people below a certain income can get it, right, you're not going to get the buy-in from people who actually would be net payers of the scheme. So the moment you do that, universal, everybody gets it. In the end, it's still a progressive tax somehow, right? If you calculate overall. Do you think that's sound and that's similar to your own reasoning as well?
Yeah. So maybe let me unpack this question of whether one should have some kind of condition on the payout in the first instance. Because I think whether you have a condition in the payout or not, or whether you tax the UBI itself or not, in the end, as you pointed out, richer taxpayers will end up paying for it, right? Whether
Right.
you have taxes or not, that's how they would fund it. So I think one of the challenges, so this is a policy question. The advantage of putting in some kind of condition on the payout initially is that maybe you reduce the overall expenditure need in the first instance, right? So you can basically reduce the budget that you need to allocate for the program if you put in a cap in the first instance. The problem, I think, of the cap in the first instance is that if your idea behind universal basic income was to give people a cushion, a safety net, whatever you want to call it, that they could rely on, in the sense that they knew that if something happened to them or their family and they weren't sure where they could go for help, at least they'd have this money coming in without them having to apply or ask any questions, right? So the moment you've got a conditional kind of scheme, you don't have that feature. And that's because a lot of these conditional schemes, the way that they would figure out whether you should or shouldn't get the payment in the first instance is they would look at your last drawn salary or the records they have of your salary.
Right.
And, COVID-19, there were people who had a lot of difficulty getting help because when they went to the authorities for help, the authorities might say, but, according to our record, you earned this much money last year. And they would say, yeah, it's got retrenched. What do you want me to do? Yeah, right. So,
Right.
these kinds of issues would be areas where even if you have a conditional kind of scheme, you have to deal with a lot of complaints or appeals from people because of issues like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, and I think what you mentioned is so true, right? And people underestimate, or maybe because not many people have gone through this, but people who have gone through this would know, right? There is an impact that poverty or a lack of money, right, does to your own dignity and your self-confidence, your emotional and mental well-being, even if it's temporary, right? I mean, there's a lot of there are a lot of issues that come with that, and I think the temporary UBI, at least during COVID, I think it made a lot of sense. So why didn't it get passed, you think? As in, why wasn't that eventually?
Well, I mean, the obvious concern is that the government already had quite a comprehensive set of policies that they had in place to alleviate the financial, the social impact of COVID, and they didn't see that their policies had anything substantially wrong with them. I mean, they were fairly confident that their policies would achieve the effect of cushioning the impact of COVID on the population. And I think I also want to say at this point that some of the policies the government implemented were actually quite unprecedented in the sense that they ended up giving quite a lot of income support to people without really asking too many questions. So I think the best example of this would actually be the self-employment relief scheme. That's the one that basically gave people automatic payouts as long as they were employed Singaporean and they had some records of their income being within a certain range. Right?
Yeah.
And again, that is an automatic payout, more or less. There of course, there were people the gaps, but to me, it was very important and innovative and satisfied many of the criteria of a so-called universal basic income scheme because it was based on the recognition that for many of the self-employed, thinking taxi drivers, hawkers, this kind of thing, right? They would have sudden drops in income because of COVID. And how are they going to prove to you, nobody's taking your taxi or whatever. It's just So, I think it's good policy. So
in fact on that scheme, I remember one of the early criticisms was, this can be taken advantage of. I mean, what was the other one? So you're right. I think that proves your point. So final one on this, right? So this is a philosophical difference, right? Those who are pro UBI versus those who are not pro UBI, right? So does this philosophy of yours extend to healthcare, for instance, or do you think every sector is different?
No. Okay. So I think I guess there are two issues I would think about. One is philosophy, right? And philosophy would to me would be questions about how far do you want to tilt the system, for example, towards individual self-responsibility versus societal responsibility and insurance, right? So that's one question of philosophy. But I think, at least for me as an economist, and I think for a lot of social scientists, we also are interested in questions of practical effects or outcomes. And this relates to the discussion we were having earlier about what the effects of poverty are on people or insecurity. And, some of those effects are quite counterproductive to the goal of actually improving everybody's welfare, in the sense that if you've got somebody who's poor and you don't do anything about it to society, right, then they dig themselves into a deeper hole, not just for themselves, but also for the next generation. And this is research that for example, myself, Ong Chien, and Irene Ng have worked on.
Yeah.
We show that, that the presence of large amounts of debt for Singaporean households actually reduces their cognitive functioning and increases their stress
Absolutely.
levels considerably, which make it hard for you to get out of that hole, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So when we talk about the practical effects, then the question I think for us would be, if I design policy this way instead of another way, for example, if I make the policy give people more automatic support, reduce out-of-pocket payments, and so on, do I get more practical effect, right? So in the case of healthcare, the tension, the trade-off is the thinking behind our current system, right, is that if we make sure that people have some kind of co-payment, and we don't try to aggressively subsidize people without first testing their wealth, means, and so on, then we reduce the amount of money we overall need to spend on subsidizing system, and we also encourage people to take better care of their own health so that they don't have to pay out of pocket so much. I mean, that's the thinking behind it, right? But you can also contrast that against the view of more like, let's say universal payer or government paid healthcare system, where the thinking is, if I make healthcare free at the point of access, then people don't worry about whether they need to cut something else to pay for their health, and therefore they don't let health problems fester until they become more expensive to treat before they go to the hospital.
Right.
They don't have the stress building up about it, thinking about how am I going to save money for my operation or whatever.
Right.
Basically, so it's a trade-off, right? Which one ends up causing more cost to the system and more problem for healthcare? That is actually, to me, an empirical question. It's not something you can determine the answer to just by moralizing about it, basically.
Right.
But my personal view is that I think the system needs to be balanced more towards, I think, greater, you might say, social payment, right? In other words, less individual responsibility, more, I think, government or taxpayer payment. Like that's my personal view on that.
And your personal view is based on the philosophy or the empirical?
No, I think it's because there's a lot of research, I think, that suggests, that basically suggests that a healthcare system with fragmented individual payment, you don't. My view or my reading of the research on this would be that the amount of money that you save, for example, due to individual responsibility, due to people not having so much moral hazard in accessing healthcare, may not be as much as the amount of money or resources you would save from people actually getting adequate care, without having to worry about payments and things like that. But to be quite frank, the literature can be read, I think, in many ways in this topic. It depends on which papers you want to believe in more and so on. I mean, because it's an academic topic, of course, you can always come wrong argument one way or the other. It's out there, okay? But that's my personal,
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So I think anecdotally also, I've heard quite a few people who say that they do not want to find out what diseases they have because they're afraid that they cannot pay for it. So I've heard these sorts of arguments before. But thank you. That was really an education in economics from you, so I really appreciate that. So let's switch gears a little, right? I mean, you were an NMP, and I mean, would you agree with me if I said that the NMP is, in essence, an undemocratic scheme, or in theory, an undemocratic scheme, an elitist scheme, but it can be beneficial for democracy, I think. So, what is your personal opinion? Do you think that is a boon or a bane for democracy, the scheme? Yeah.
Okay, I think I'm going to give a very long answer to this.
Okay, please do.
I think the way I think about this is, let's start by unpacking, I think, what we mean by our understanding of democracy, right? And I think the criticism there, I think, is very valid, right? It's basically, why should we have an unelected MP have any kind of say in public affairs? And of course, we reject that idea because, to many of us, it breaks the notion, I think, we have of a representative democracy. But then, see, that's the issue, right? Then we accept that our current understanding of a democracy in Singapore and many countries is representative. In other words, we believe that we should have some kind of parliament or legislature. We elect people to represent us in there, and those guys we elect, men and women, then they decide what the country should be doing. Okay, but I think if we think about this problem a bit further, we realize that this notion that democracy is about electing people who reflect our will, and then for our will to be reflected nationally by the contest of wills. In other words, the more people want something, then that's what the country is going to get. That's where we're going to go. That notion actually itself is also not democratic. Okay, the reason why it's not democratic is that if we think about what actually makes democratic societies good places to be and live in, most or all, I think, democratic societies actually have plenty of institutions which are in fact profoundly undemocratic, in the sense that they've got nothing to do about reflecting the will of the people, but we create and put those institutions in place because we think that in the long run, they actually safeguard the interests of democracy. And the example I want to give is not the NMP system, it's actually the judiciary, right?
Right,
So
I was going
why
to
do
say
we
the
have that? I
judiciary.
mean, we have a legal system, we have a judiciary because we want it to be independent. We want judges and juries to decide matters without reference to public opinion. I mean, of course, we want them to know what the public is thinking, right? Because obviously, you know, you want people to reflect the fact that if many people think a crime is heinous, then obviously, you know, it attracts severe sanction. But that's not the same thing as saying that the judge or the jury should literally ask the people, hey, what do you think? And then go and decide the case accordingly. Right.
So it's meant to be an elitist institution precisely because that is how it's going to protect, safeguard democracy.
I think it protects the broader democratic ideals that you know people deserve to be treated equally according to the law, and that they have, you know, basically a fair they have a fair trial. And so I mean, even when you're a jury system, right? I mean, of course, you know, then you have to debate about judge or jury, but even in the jury system, the jury is not meant to literally reflect the public opinion. They're actually just meant to sit as judges, as lay judges essentially, but they are really not meant to go and ask their friends, what do you think? I mean, that's not what juries do at all. So yeah, so that's an institution which is not democratic in the sense of being representative democracy or reflecting popular will, but it's something we put in place because we think it improves the quality of our governance, right? And constitutions are the same. So coming back to this very long story.
No, it's a fair analogy, I think.
To NMPs, it's the same issue, right? NMPs are unelected. Yeah, in that sense, they're not democratic. But if the institution can somehow improve or be in service to the broader objectives of a democratic society, then I think that's useful. And I think for NMPs in particular, one area which I felt that they have been maybe useful in Singapore is that there are views that are hard to reflect, I think, in the public discourse in Singapore, especially in Parliament. And, you know, these would be, for example, social views or views from segments of society, which at the moment, we do not see fit to attempt to represent, you see? So one obvious example would be, I think, the views of the LGBTQ plus minority in Singapore, okay? So they exist. They could be a substantial minority of the population, but in our current democratic process, we do not see any, at least Parliament sees no need to specially cater to represent their views. And frankly, a lot of elected MPs have a lot of caution about representing their views because of the fear that more conservative voters might vote against them for even just bringing up the views of this population. But NMPs hopefully don't worry about this kind of thing, right? Although I have to say, in this topic, when I have brought up such views on occasion, I actually did get emails from people. Okay, very angry emails, and sometimes from more conservative people asking me kind of why I did those things. So it's not as if I don't get public backlash, but I don't have to worry about keeping my job.
Exactly. Right? That's what I wanted to say, right? You don't have to worry about the next election, right? So just on this issue, right? Section 377A. In fact, it's very rare to see politicians take a stand either way, right? They will try to make their views as murky as middle ground as possible, not to offend either side, right? So I agree with you. Actually, NMPs are perhaps best positioned to propose repeal, right? But why hasn't that happened since Siu Kam Hong?
Yeah, so just give you my own take on this. You're right that NMPs could They could actually table a bill, a private member's bill to repeal 377A or any other kinds of legislation like this, which might be viewed as problematic, discriminatory, and so on. And if there were enough NMPs to support the motion to bring it to a debate, then the question would actually be put to the House, and the House would have to vote on it. But I'll tell you what the issue is that I at least thought about and struggled with, right? I mean, I think the first thing I want to point out is that this idea that you can in fact put I guess a private member's bill up for a piece of to change a piece of legislation that might have real impact on lots of people, that isn't something that I think a lot of NMPs are aware of, or even a lot of backbenchers I think are aware of or really consider very seriously, right? Because in our parliamentary system, which is similar to many other Westminster systems, individual MPs have very little power actually. They have a lot of power on paper, but in practice, they don't tend to do these kinds of things because it's not what their political parties, for example, tend to support in any case. So that's the first thing, lack of awareness of how this actually works, you see. But I think the second thing for me in thinking about this was, I personally did not think that it would do anybody any good if such a debate were brought into the House without a very strong sense that, I mean, because personally I'm for repeal, right? So I wouldn't see there's any point in bringing it to the House unless I was very certain that it would win resoundingly, and not only win resoundingly in the House, but also win resoundingly in the public. And in the public means that the public at the end of the day would have to be majority convinced that this is the right thing for Singapore. Because if you don't win, or you have a very narrow victory, what do you get? You might change the law, but you're not going to change anybody's minds. And there are going to be a lot of Singaporeans, a lot of conservative Singaporeans who will believe that the democratic system has been hijacked in favor of minority, okay? And if they believe that, then they're not going to treat this minority any better, okay? So how does that help people? I mean, sure, I appreciate that it helps, for example, LGBTQI plus minority, because then they don't fear being arrested or anything like that anymore. I understand that. But in the rest of their daily life, it's not going to help them very much, you see. That's the problem.
Right. So I mean, we didn't plan to speak about this at all, but now we have. But it's an interesting tangent, and when you raise that, right, that's a very, very pragmatic view of how. I mean, you personally feel it should be repealed. However, you feel that whether we like it or not, majority opinion does matter. Right? I mean, obviously, I have no standing to speak on this, right? But I can speak, for instance, on the Chinese privilege argument, for instance, right? For me, like I was one of those who not the initial ones, but later on, I propagated the idea as well, right? And then some people say, right, oh, so what if others don't believe that there is Chinese privilege, right? Why does it matter as long as it's the truth? Well, why it matters is because we are sharing the society with them, right? So whether we like it or not, it matters what other people think, even if it's diametrically opposed to what we believe as well, right? So yeah, I think when you said that, I mean, it does resonate with me as well. So how do you balance that then? How do you balance the your own principles versus pragmatic political considerations, right? Because as an academic, it's very easy for me. I don't have to balance that, right? But as an NMP, how do you balance that?
I think for that issue, I think by the time I realized, maybe some others realized that it might be possible to bring it to a debate and think about it. We also realized we just didn't have the time at that point in time to actually get it done properly, right? Because if I noted, I think if you wanted to do that, you would have to first talk to other MPs to see what is it that they're thinking. Although, I mean, I know in this case, most of them would think, well, whatever I think personally, I'm not going to stick my neck out for this kind of thing, right? So that's what a lot of them would be thinking. But apart from that, then it's about going to the public. It's about putting the reasons for talking about this at this point in time to the public, and trying to get a sense of is it possible to get enough public support on your side such that people are ready to repeal it, and for people who are not so ready and very unhappy of it, can they be at least convinced that on net this isn't going to be horrible for Singapore? Because a lot of people genuinely believe that such a repeal would on net be terrible for Singapore, right? They're entitled to that view, but I think at least if you can try to shape that view or change it or adjust it a bit, I mean, that would be helpful because, yeah. So I think that's the issue. But I think such a movement would have taken a very long time and a lot of effort. And yeah, by the time we had thought about, or at least I had thought about it, it was clear that that would be just impossible in that term, the remaining term of
Right,
parliament.
right. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was another comprehensive answer, right? So we are 35 minutes in already. I thought this season I just wanted to limit it to 40 minutes, but it's not gonna happen. Don't worry. It's okay. That means it's a good thing. So we'll try to target hopefully 50 minutes. So now we are about what 1.5 years away from the general or since the general election. Do you think what has changed, right? And I say this in a broader sense because there is a COP going on and the report is not out, so I really do not want any particular comments. It could be contempt of parliament. We also don't want to be seen to be exerting any pressure on the COP. So, but just from a general sense, what do you think? Do you have any comments about the political scene, about processes, and so on? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe I talk a bit about the general political scene first, and we can circle back to some more recent events if we want. Yeah. So I think, honestly, I think for my own sanity, I try not to follow the full nitty-gritty of all politics too closely. Of course, I mean, I pay attention to what happens in Parliament. I read, the news reports on it, but I definitely don't live stream Parliament every time it's in session, because I think having sat in there for almost 2 years, I kind of know how it goes, and I also kind of know that usually the best bits actually do get reported on, or
right.
one way or another, like maybe
so not everything is equally important, basically, right? So.
Well, I mean, we would like to think it's all important, but yeah. So, but my general sense on politics since the last general election, right? I think I think on the one hand, people have talked about how the role and the presence of the opposition in Singapore has become a bit more entrenched due to more gains, electoral gains that have been made, and also, of course, appointing Mr. Pritam Singh as the leader of the opposition. So I think these are some steps towards maybe a more robust parliamentary democracy. But at the same time, I find that for me, many of the institutions which I consider indispensable to, I think, a well-ordered democracy, you might say, I think a lot more could be done there. So what I mean here is, I think by further normalizing and recognizing the presence and role of civil society in Singapore as, stakeholders who have a place in political and social debates. I mean, I think more could be done there. Having, like a stronger and more diverse independent media. And by independent media, I also don't mean all the WhatsApp messages I get from the People's Republic China or whatever it is. Okay, that's not,
right.
Yeah, that's independent media, but it's not really what I'm thinking of here. I mean, I think, there could be more developments here, but it's just about the institutions, right? Because I think my belief is we will not get closer, I think, to what some of us want in terms of higher quality, more democratic, more responsive government and social and political process in Singapore purely just from electing opposition members alone. I don't think we're going to get that just from that alone. I think we need a lot more strength in our institutions, but here I think we also have to recognize that because of the concerns that many people have about being associated with these institutions, pushing on them, especially in areas where doing so might be seen to be opposing the government, it's very hard to build, I think, strength in this area.
Right.
I think, some good points are, first, I think for environmental institutions, I think by and large, they have somehow become, quote unquote, legitimized over the past couple of years. I mean, that's to me very clear. Basically, government, I think, has tried to co-opt them as much as
exactly.
them, but I think they have emerged as, I think, quite an interesting and important, I think, like a civil society force. So I think it's just a question about are there more groups which can build on that, along those lines. Yeah.
But the environment, I guess, I agree with you, it's a thriving area of civil society. But that's also because the issue is not super threatening to the government's legitimacy, right? So which is why they allow for a versioning of so I guess it won't be equal because civil society is not a monolith, right? Like there'll be some issues which are more OB marker-ish
Yeah.
than others, or nearer to OB markers than others, right? So basically your main, maybe gripe is too strong a word, but your hope is that civil society in particular will be strengthened.
Civil society,
Right,
media,
right.
academia as well, for
Yeah,
example.
yeah, yeah.
All of us trying to do things on the margins
Right,
of it.
right.
I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I think I want to be clear here that I don't think that necessarily the best way to do things is to, if to go straight for
The
I
jugular,
guess
yeah.
the
Yeah, yeah,
government
yeah. Yeah, yeah,
legitimacy
yeah.
or whatever it is,
Yeah,
in a
yeah, yeah, yeah.
process and then try to shoot that down. I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think we both know some people in common who, for some reason or another, have decided to do that. And, quite apart from anything, any repercussions to them personally, I think the broader question is it really productive, right? Because, by and large, most Singaporeans support the elected government of the day. They might have a lot of
Yeah.
gripes for this and that, but the question of legitimacy of the government of the day is not in serious
Yeah.
question for the vast
Yeah, yeah.
majority of Singaporeans. So is
Yeah,
it really,
absolutely.
anyway, yeah, that's just
Right.
fine beyond
Right.
that.
But I agree with you in almost everything you say. But don't you think, Prof, that the existence of those people also,
Mm.
I mean, there's a place for them also, because
Yeah, yeah.
then other people become more moderate in because moderation and all is all relative, right?
Yeah,
So
I mean, I
the,
personally agree there's a place for them, but
right,
I think, it's also very hard for me, I think, to comment on whether specific actions taken against one
right.
person or another are actually
Understood.
wrong,
Right, right,
because
understood.
by and large,
Yeah, yeah.
anything that happened it is the result of the law being applied in a particular way, and I guess it comes back to the problem of if one doesn't agree with the law, one has to change the law. But if it is the law, then you see that's an issue,
I know,
right?
I
Yeah,
get what you mean.
yeah,
I get what you mean. And also, we cannot also reach a stage where
yeah.
everything is viewed completely through partisan lines, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, if the sky is blue, it's the PAP's fault, right? Also, we don't. I mean, that wouldn't be healthy, also, right? I mean, we
Yeah.
wouldn't want that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so for you personally, right? Okay, by the way, I'll save this for the last question. I
Hmm?
just because this was a development today, so
Oh.
I saw Ong Ye Kung's. So I haven't seen an entire speech. I just saw news reports on it, and he basically said that Minister Ong, he said that own self check own self is a virtue, right? So do you have any comments on that? I guess you sort of see where he's coming from, because he says if a government is able to check itself, then it shows that there are robust checks and balances within, like, civil servants. One could argue, for instance, permanent secretaries, right, are as important or more important than ministers in some cases, right? And if they can push back against ministers, especially because they are subject matter experts, right? So probably he's talking about those kinds of things, right? But what do you think? Is that valid, or is that sufficient? Yeah.
So I think in any organization, especially in any democracy, you always want to put effort, of course, into setting up, I guess you might say, inquisitorial or governance structures that basically audit what you're doing, right? So of course, there's nothing wrong with the idea that you have to check yourself. But at the same time, even after you check yourself, there's also, I think, nothing wrong with the idea that it's valuable to also have entities which are more outside the system and especially not beholden in any way to the powers that be, to also continuing performing that function, right? So, this is another way of saying that just because a corporation, for example, has got a board of directors who ostensibly, has some independent directors who check on the management, and the corporation also has got regularly appointed auditors who check the accounts every year. Well, but such corporations can still have, for example, special auditors, right? They can have those things. Such corporations can also be subject
Right.
to extra independent auditors, so
Right.
activist shareholders who nominate somebody who's completely unconnected to the current board, who comes in there with the express purpose of trying to shake things up a bit and, saying, look, are things really being done the best way they can? There's nothing inconsistent, right, about doing the best you can with internal governance processes, but also not being hostile to external governance processes. And I think the issue here, I suppose, I would take with, maybe with the minister's approach this, or maybe not the minister. I don't want to single him out now because he's just articulating to me, I think, a broader government philosophy. Right. I think the broader thing I would take some issue with is that, it's one thing to have internal processes that check on the government, but it's another thing to also not to be too hostile to external attempts to do so. And I think one of the issues we do have is that from time to time we are actually quite hostile to external attempts to do so. And of course, I think I want to be clear here that not all external attempts to, you might say, interrogate or criticize the government are benign, right? I mean, there are, in fact, some attempts which are not so benign. I don't want to raise the factor of quote-unquote foreign interference here, but I think we have to be aware that not everything is benign. But still, the question is, does it actually warrant the level of suspicion, hostility, and so on that some people have encountered and experienced? And I think that's an open question. And personally, I think things could be dialed back a bit, I think.
Right, absolutely. So not everything is benign. I think we must be real about that. But not everything should be viewed through the hostile lens as well, right? So,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are a few questions here I wanted to take just perhaps quickly before we end. So any thoughts on, in the same speech, Singapore arriving at a two-party system?
Yeah, I think my broad response to that is two parties don't the democracy make, right? I mean, if we look at any of the other two-party systems globally, or even the multi-party democracies, and there's still a lot of things lacking, I think, about
absolutely
the fundamental nature of democratic contest, especially in parliament, right? Where you where your elected representatives hold power, is that it's always going to be very challenging, I think, once you vote people into power, to make sure that they actually live up to their oaths, right, of service, and actually conduct the government in a way which is in the public's interest. And that's why I think I don't want to leave it just up to the politicians of the two parties, three parties, whatever it might be. That's why I also push for strengthening the other institutions, because I think you need the combination of all these things. You can't just rely on two parties, as the US, I think, a lot of people.
Absolutely. I mean, two-party system, I think we must not think that it's a panacea, right? I mean, Lisa Ditz, she wrote a book called The Tyranny of the Two-Party System, right? And how, I mean, this was before 2016, of course, where the two parties have basically dominated the entire space, and there's not enough room for alternative voices as well, right? So I mean, we must be realistic about that as well. So so would an ombudsman work? Then
that is a concept I don't know much about. I mean, it has been highlighted to me before. So this is the idea that you would have this special appointee or person to whom you could actually report certain matters and so on, and then they would be empowered to investigate it and so on, right? Yeah. So I think it's not an uninteresting concept. In some ways, though, I would suggest some of the institutions that we already have, which are independent of the executive and the legislature, such as the judiciary, are already meant to do this in part, right? I mean, that's the whole idea behind, concepts like judicial review, where if there is a decision the government has made, which somebody feels is clearly unconstitutional or exceeds the boundaries of executive power, then that can be brought to the court. I mean, the problem, of course, is that everybody also recognizes that bringing a proper case on this is very expensive, right? I mean, not just lawyers' fees, but also in terms of what the aggrieved member of the public would have to do in order to get anything done there. So I think the ombudsman idea, in some sense, the reason why is I think it has some appeal is that people imagine that the process would somehow be more straightforward and simpler than bringing it through the legal system. But that is something I honestly, I don't know much about. I mean, I think look at how such a system does operate in other places where it exists, and to think a bit carefully about what is it good at versus what is the judicial system good at, versus finally, what is the electoral system good at, right? Because here I'm thinking of what I think Minister Shanmugam once said, in the context of POSMA, right? So, you know, he was making the whole argument that at the end of the day, if the public doesn't agree with the decisions that the minister is making, using the minister's discretion against POFMA, and if the public also feels that the judiciary or the challenges made against those decisions do not bear the results that, you know, that the people feel is right with the popular will, then the public can go and vote the minister out. We're saying that.
Right.
And of course, you know, I mean, I think he said that with the awareness and knowledge that the public was not exactly going to vote every single minister out just because they disagreed with one or two POFMA decisions. You know, his broader point is that. Broader point is some decisions need to be contested through the political process, some through the legal process, you know. So where does the ombudsman fill in there? I think it's a question. Yeah.
Right. Oh, absolutely. So the devil is in the details, right? So one question from Shout for Joy. Just briefly, what do you think, as an academic yourself, what do you think about Minister Maliki's response in Parliament, recent response in Parliament about academic freedom?
Okay. So I mean, Minister Maliki himself is a former academic, and he probably can still return to NUS if he wants. So, okay, and I also gave a talk on this, by the way, at the invitation of the folks who did the academic freedom survey. And my sense of it, okay, like, I don't know whether this will answer the question directly, right? But I guess for me, the way I think about it is, what's the broader role of the state in defining academic freedom? Okay, so there are some people who take a very, I think, strong position that academic freedom means that academics themselves should decide and determine all of their affairs in the interest of society, right? And I think there is merit to that view, but I also think that there is merit to the view that other stakeholders should also have a say in this. And the other stakeholders will include the public as well as the state, right? And the reason for this is, at the end of the day, the argument for academic freedom is that by giving academics some measure of freedom to say what they want and teach and do research on what they want, right? Then this is a process that allows society to arrive at a better version of the truth.
Right.
Better version of the truth, because one of the things to do in academia is always find out new truths that may support old understandings. Okay. Now,
small t, not capital T.
The problem is, how do you decide what you should be working on? The reality is, many academic disciplines and circles are actually very constrained by the thinking of a very small number of influential members of the profession. They're the ones who are the senior professors, the gatekeepers of the profession. They're actually the ones who decide at the end of the day what really is academic freedom. Because you could say, look, I have the academic freedom to do research on this topic, but if your research is not accepted by the gatekeepers in the discipline, freedom is meaningless because you cannot keep your job. That's the problem. So in my broader conception of this, I think the state and other stakeholders do have some say in this, but at the same time, I also reject, I think, the proposition that the state's influence should be so large to the extent that the state alone gets to decide this is good research, this is bad research, you know, and to hand out promotions, discipline, and so on accordingly. So that concept I reject. But I also, you know, don't take the view that the moment the minister or whoever comes to the university should say, no, I can't listen to you, you know? I mean, I don't take that view. Okay, so to go to some of the more practical issues, I think, in this whole concept of academic freedom in Singapore, I think, by and large, you can research a lot of controversial and sensitive things in Singapore, but I think it is also true that if you want to do research that, you know, that might question, for example, government policy, legitimacy, and things of that sort, right? Then you got to be pretty sure that what you're doing is correct from the academic point of view, you know? I think that's what you have to bear in mind. And you also have to bear in mind that doing research that I think accords with the views of the powers that be. And this would be true no matter whether it's the minister's view or whether it's the senior professor's view, right? My view is that doing research that accords with the views of powers that be is always easier to do, okay? Because even if you do like sloppy half-ass research there, if it's in accordance with the powers that be, everybody, right? They're going to clap you on the back and say, this is great. Okay, come on, I mean, that's the reality. So, so I think we have to recognize that the incentives are against people exercising their academic freedom to do research on certain critical topics simply because everybody is aware things need to be really, really accurate, you know, and really well researched. Whereas the bar is lower, you know, when you're just kind of like doing stuff that parrots what people already think lah. But this is the
Right.
burden all researchers bear. Okay, I mean, I just want to be clear on this. Even if there was no government, influence here at
Right.
all, researchers bear the burden, and every time you want to challenge your orthodoxy, you got to be prepared for an uphill slope.
Right.
So yeah, you have to believe in it. Is my point lah.
Right.
Yeah. what you're
Whether
doing.
it's political or disciplinary
Yes.
orthodoxy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. you
Right.
gotta be-
Okay. Thank you for that. I just to add on, I think as long as Teh Tarik with Walid is allowed to exist, it shows that there's some academic freedom. Oh, we are allowed to. Yeah. Okay. So final question: biggest regret and biggest achievement in politics. In politics, not in life. Okay. In politics.
okay.
Yeah, okay.
No, I don't know how exciting this answer is, but okay. I think originally, maybe I won't answer about whether I have achievement or regret, but just a bit about my thinking process in the matter. When I, when I filled in those forms for the nomination, went through the selection process and so on, the reason why I was doing it was I thought, okay, I could contribute as an academic maybe to policy debates in Parliament. And what I was concerned about at the time is that I felt that in a lot of the discussions we were having, maybe not so much in Parliament, but certainly everywhere else, there was a lot of growing disregard, I think, for facts, for reasoned arguments, for critical thinking on policy matters. And I think these were fundamental problems to our democracy. I mean, the fundamental problems to democracy anywhere, okay? And so I thought it would be useful as an academic if I could maybe try to I guess show people what is some academic thinking, what is some research, what is some evidence on some of these matters that we were interested in. And these would be useful, non-partisan, hopefully, views to be articulated.
Right.
Okay? But at the same time, I came to realize, I think from being Parliament in a while, that it's very difficult to fit, I think, into a parliamentary democracy if you're a non-partisan, singular MP, okay, in any way it makes impact. Because the reality is, you don't control the agenda, right? So the way I think about this is this. Look, Parliament's kind of like a moving train, okay? So, when you elect a Parliament or a government, they have an agenda in mind, which hopefully they have sold the public on, which is why they got elected, right? And, ostensibly, the MPs control Parliament because you need their votes to get legislation passed. But in reality, in every Westminster legislature, it's a small group of MPs who happen to be the senior members of the party, the executive, right, the government ministers. Right. They're the ones who control where the Parliament train is going, okay? And individual MPs cannot do anything to stop or redirect the train. What the MPs end up doing is they just decide, look, if the train is at this station, do I get on and get off, right? When the conductor is in front of me, that's the minister, do I tell the conductor, hey, I think we should be doing this instead, or, and so on. But really, you don't get to say, right? I mean, on paper, you say you need all the votes in order to pass. I mean, you need at least 50% of the votes to pass legislation. But in reality, it feels a lot more that all you're doing on a day-to-day basis in Parliament is looking at where the government wants to point the train and just deciding for this particular stop, am I saying I'm on board or am I just keeping quiet? That's really what you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
But the battle is not there, right? The battle is in the court of public opinion.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
So that's the thing I came to realize, right? I came to realize after being a bit dispirited in this for a while that actually it's not even about talking to the conductor or the train driver. What you're really doing is you're shouting very loudly so that everybody can hear, hey, I think the driver should be doing this because of these reasons. And in the end, what the driver does is he or she looks around and he says, oh, I don't have to listen to this MP actually, but those guys behind the MP, they're starting to look a bit unhappy, a bit discomforted by what he's saying, so maybe I need to listen to them. And that's really, I think, the value of parliamentary debate, right? It's not about changing the minds, I think, of any other MP or the ministers or anybody like that. It's about putting a view out there that changes public opinion. But this is something that I think I wasn't really aware of, I think, before I was an NMP.
Right.
And even today, I think most governments try to, I think, maintain the gentle fiction that the whole idea of parliament is to debate an idea, to have parliament decide based on debate. Whereas the reality is it's about views for the public to judge on. And eventually, if the public is unconvinced by a certain argument the government is bringing forth, the government will be forced to change its mind because it cannot actually hold the public anymore at that point.
I think that's a lesson in politics, like right there, right? And understanding parliament. Thank you
But
for
it's
that.
not this at the
Yeah.
start. That's my point. It took me a long time to get this.
Right. No, but thank you. I mean, that's the practitioner's view, right? So I really appreciate that. So this one is the final. Let's end off on a light-hearted, non-partisan uh, manner. So, who is your favorite PAP MP and who's your favorite opposition MP? Cannot say,
No,
cannot say SM Taman.
I don't answer that. Come on.
Oh, really? No,
It's very
okay.
hard with people, please.
Okay, I mean, I don't know. Maybe you work
Yeah,
with somebody.
reserve.
Well, okay. It's okay.
Very fun. Yeah, I don't want to.
I give a non-partisan one each, But okay. It's fine. So,
No, I mean,
so
let me
yeah.
just say a beefy thing, which is that generally, I mean, my feeling has always been that MPs from both sides have always tried to do their duty the best way they felt. Okay, the way they felt there was best.
That's so
I mean,
PC.
no,
Yeah.
it's not very beefy, but
Eh?
um,
Yeah.
yeah, but the reason why I say that is, I think it's very easy to be, how to say, to be cynical, right? It's very easy.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
these guys are only in it for their own personal gain or whatever.
Yeah.
But the reality is, politicians go through a lot of shit, man. I mean,
Oh, for sure.
politicians very long, but just the amount of, look, you say something and you get hate in your social media feed and so on. I mean, it's very dispiriting. And in fact, if you're an elected politician, especially if you're a government one, then you also have to deal with the fact that a lot of the people telling you stuff are just doing so for their own selfish gain, right? You no longer know who are your real friends. I mean, come on, that's a real problem.
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly.
So I wouldn't want to be a politician necessarily, but I'm you have to put up with a lot, I think, to be one.
I think politicians only know who their real friends are once they retire, once they don't have power,
exactly.
right? Yeah, because people surround you maybe because of your position more than because of the person, right? So So thank you so much, Professor Theseira. Sorry we went over 1 hour, but it was really a fascinating conversation, and clearly you're an extremely intelligent person. I wish that you had done another term together with Anthea as well. But I mean, I think one of the things I will always be grateful to you for is your stand on POFMA. And it wasn't an easy stand. And I always feel like NMPs confer a degree of legitimacy on any vote that no other person can, not the elected or the NCMP. So thank you for that. Yeah, and thank you everyone. Good night. And all the videos will be uploaded on YouTube. And I really hate to do this, but Steffi asked me to, so please like and subscribe. Okay. Thank you so much, Prof. Okay, see you.
For having me. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.